All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for staying for the end. For those that are in the room, so this session, it's really just to be a chat with both these guys. Now, I want to provide a bit of an introduction to both Andrew and Tim, just because I'll let them talk about sort of themselves as part of this conversation, but there's a couple things that we really want to cover with this, and it's covering a couple areas around what's happening in Australia from a medical and a health perspective and the trends that they're seeing, and then also what's happening in the private credit side on the business side, because these have become such core areas for Australia, and they become areas which we're well known for, especially in Singapore as well. So with the love of yield that is strong, and also our known for our ability to take technologies and know that Australia is not a big enough country to commercialize it at home and then export products worldwide. And when you will see with Rapid Response, their product is already been sold to 22,000 customers in 7 countries. See, I remember that from this morning. I'm very good at that. Okay, so as a first one, Andrew, I'll just kick off with you. The area, and I know that you've got your own sort of investment background as well as part, and sort of before and as part of this role. How have you seen the shift towards personalised medical devices over the last 5 years?
I think it's undeniable that there's been a massive shift in personalisation across so many spaces, and definitely medicine as well. And it goes off pharma, bioceuticals, and also now in medical devices like the cell aid. One of the things that we think is a massive opportunity is the fact that there hasn't been a lot of development at all in this particular space, because you've had a lot of legacy companies which just didn't see the personal space as an area to go into. They sell into public access spaces, so they'll sell to buildings and governments, but they just didn't really explore the fact that they've got a $2,500 device. They thought, well, no one's going to buy this at home, so we're not going to do it. And plus,
I've actually got a friend in Singapore who's actually got one of those devices in his home at the recommendation of his doctor, to give you an idea.
Yeah. So I hadn't heard of that. So it was through a personal incident that the CLA came about. As I said previously, our CEO and founder, he was at home with his wife. She had a cardiac arrest at home, and he's one of these just absolutely tenacious guys that goes, this happens all the time. Every year, 8 million people around the world die from sudden cardiac arrest. There has to be a better solution, especially given 80% of them happen at home. So he thought, you know what, I'm going to go and find the solution. And that's how the CLA came about.
It's funny, I've been talking to people about Rapid Response today and about your product. And I think that one of the things that would be nice, and I know there's sort of things why you can't do it just yet, but there's stories of people that have had their lives saved from your product. It must be a great motivator from a company standpoint.
Yeah, it's huge. And I put up a figure on the presentation saying that we want to save 100,000 lives by 2040. And it's very easy to think, oh, that's just a corporate slogan, no one cares. But the people in the company, I can absolutely tell you, they really care. We had an incident where one of our customers was going for a jog with a woman. She was 32. This was 2 weeks ago. She just collapsed in the middle of their jog. She just went unconscious. He got out his defibrillator because he's such a passionate fan of it. He had it with him. He takes it everywhere. Put it on her, went through 2 cycles. She recovered. And that's an incident where, and everyone around the office heard about it because we know when these events happen. And that's literally a life that was saved because of the work that everyone at the company does. And she was 32 years old and she's live today. And if it hadn't been for this device, she wouldn't have, because it took 40 minutes for the ambulance to arrive. So you don't survive 40 minutes with a cardiac arrest. You've got 10 minutes without with CPR, you might have 15 minutes, but it's just so unlikely. And yeah, it really does affect everyone around the office.
So in the future, everyone needs to go outside with 2 things, their Starlink and their Cell Aid. Okay, and for you, Tim, just going on to Causeway, you guys have been around I mentioned this, you guys have been around for 20 years. The private credit space has been pretty much under the radar until, 12 months ago? And then all of a sudden there's daily news articles.
Yeah, it's funny. I had some conversations with some people recently and even today, and they said, well, private credit, the concept of lending to companies, it's been around for a millennia. And that's true. People have been lending to companies. I think Andrew and I might have even had that conversation. People have been lending to companies for thousands of years. And the concept of lending to a business is not new. However, private credit, and especially in Australia, certainly has evolved over the last 20 years. When we deployed our first fund, I wasn't there for that deployment. I'm not quite that old. No one knew what private credit was. You'd go and you'd talk about private credit and they'd kind of look at you, so is it like private equity? And it's no, not quite. It's a little bit different, but the same kind of concept. You're lending in private markets. And over the last even 5 years, so I started at Causeway about 5 years ago, when I would go and talk to friends of mine and I'd say, I'm in private credit, and they'd go, are you a loan shark? Like, no, I'm not a loan shark. That's not what we do. I don't get those questions anymore. People understand what private credit is, and it has evolved and has developed. And you've seen it in Australia really start to become a genuine source of capital for businesses and also a source of income for investors.
What's your thoughts? It was something mentioned today. Obviously, we had January Capital, who have been the first to build a private credit fund. I have also noticed one of the biggest trends I've seen in 2024 specifically. It's interesting how many people that were previously doing venture investment are now also looking to start their own private credit fund or moving into the private credit business. What's your thoughts on that? Like, they're obviously very different profile types of businesses.
They are different profile types of businesses, and a venture fund and a private credit fund, they have their place in the market, and we view that we have our place in the market. It's a specialised industry, or rather a specialised niche that we focus on, and that's small to medium-sized businesses in Australia and New Zealand who have gone through the venture stage, so they are cash flow positive. They're not pre-revenue, but they're looking for growth. They're looking to get to that next stage where they might get taken out by either a larger NBFI or a bank. So you're taking on a different risk profile than what you are if you're in venture debt, or venture capital rather. And so it means it's a different mindset. We're really focused on capital preservation. We've got to focus, we give you $1, we want $1 plus interest back. Whereas a venture investor is, we give you $1, we want 10 times that back or more. And so it's a different mindset and a different way of managing. So while you can, there's certainly crossover skills, there's no doubt about that. But if you've got someone who doesn't have experience in actually lending to companies, but has experience in investing from a venture side, you want to make sure that they do actually have those guardrails around them so that they're not doing venture investing when they should actually be doing private debt or more secure investing.
Makes sense. And I suppose what I find really interesting about speaking to people in your spot where you are actually loaning people is you probably have a great assessment of what's happening in the economy, in the real economy, because of the types of companies that you're lending to, and what they're experiencing, what they're communicating to you. What would you say your feedback is on what's happening in the economy in general at the moment?
So in terms of Australia, I think in terms of globally, you've obviously just seen the US Fed cut rates, which means they're concerned about the direction of the US economy.
No, he said the exact words, everything is fine. I find when my wife says that also means everything is fine. Just kidding.
Absolutely. Also when my wife says that. So I think the reality is that usually when you hear something from someone in those positions, it's the opposite is true. That's not always the case, but often is. So that's the US and the global economy. But in Australia, we currently have rates on hold. My personal opinion is that I don't think they're going to be cut this year. There is rumblings that they might, but I don't think they will. And what that means for those who are familiar or unfamiliar with Australia is we don't have 30-year fixed mortgages. We have mortgages that go up and down with the base rate. So what that means is that when we have high base rates, we have high mortgages. That puts pressure on the consumer. That puts pressure on their ability to spend discretionary. So what we are seeing in the market and the economy in Australia is a lot of pullback from discretionary spend. And so Causeway as a fund is now focused on business to business and businesses that will be able to see through this type of economic activity where there might be a little bit of a downturn in terms of consumer spend, but from a B2B perspective, there is opportunity there.
And would you think that also, and I imagine Singapore would be in a very similar position with that sort of reduction in consumer spend. I also heard that the discretionary business spend as well is also an area which has been, I know you mentioned you sort of more focused on B2B, but the discretionary of nice to have sort of, spends from businesses is also another challenge.
Yeah, that's right. And businesses are certainly looking at their hip pocket or their cash flows and saying, what can we afford to deploy and what can we not? And the key thing is that you need to look at, and we've got a very experienced credit team, 30 plus years average experience across. So they've gone through credit cycles. So they know what to look for during potential downturns. I'm not saying there's going to be one, but we're credit guys, you need to always think that that's a possibility. So they know what to look for. So when you see businesses stopping to spend or being much more selective about where they're going to spend, you need to go, okay, but what's critical to your business? Where has to be spent? And you look for those businesses that provide those types of services. So a good example, and this is one that's mandated in Australia, is fire alarm systems. It's regulated, it's federally mandated. You must have a smoke alarm system in your apartment, house, strata building. If you don't, you'll get fined or you'll have a fire, which is even worse.
Less inspector detector.
So that's the kind of thing that will see itself through both upturns and downturns, but it will be consistent.
And moving on to you, Andrew, obviously you're in the medical device area, and if you go look to the generally that area, Australia's done great in regards to medical device. We've got some impressive companies, whether it be from heart-related, like companies like Cochlear, and I hate when they just escape from my head at the same time. I think of 4DX, which is one of our old clients, which went on to list and become a half a billion dollar company at one stage on the ASX. Australia does well, and medical device is obviously easier from getting approval from a regulatory perspective. What have you found have been some of the challenges and opportunities for you guys in moving or being able to export into other countries?
Well, we actually made a sort of strategic decision quite early on to go after the CE certification. So one of the first certifications we got, one of the first, was the CE mark, which basically opens up us to a lot of the world. And we can actually leverage that to get approvals in other countries. So a lot of other countries basically won't actually have the full regulatory regime and testing program themselves. They'll see that you've got CE mark and then you go through for approval for other people. CE and FDA are the two hardest, and they're the most universally recognised, so FDA in the US. So we got CE mark a couple of years ago and then have now leveraged that, as you said, into 7 countries. We're about to announce 2 more, but for now we're selling to 7 countries. And then we're on the path to get FDA approval. So we've already engaged with the FDA. We've had conversations with them. They're very positive signs about us going down the de novo path, which accelerates to a 12-month period rather than the typical 18 to 24-month period, or 36-month period sometimes. So we're going to start that next year. And we're very confident of getting FDA. And once we've got FDA with CE, that pretty much opens up us to the world, really.
And moving on to I suppose a bit of a sensitive topic, after COVID and after what's sort of been come out, sort of some of the responses that people have had to the vaccines and so forth, we did a session titled Matters of the Heart, because we thought it was an important subject to do a deep dive into, because the actual number one killer of people is basically heart disease and heart related. And so from your perspective, what are those trends now that you guys have observed in the last few years, as far as how much more? And I'll tell you, like, we've seen it within our team. I've seen it in family members. There is so many more. Like I've had a family member who literally after the vaccine, within, I think it was like 1 week or something, ended up having to get a pacemaker in, as an example. So what have you observed from the rise in incidences related to the heart? And what, I suppose, how do you assess that from your perspective?
I'm going to stick away from what the cause of those heart-related issues are, but there's no doubt there is definitely more instances of heart incidents post-COVID or post the vaccine. That's really elevated the awareness of the problem amongst the public. Now, and I looked at the data back as far as I could find it, and basically for the last 50 years, sudden cardiac arrest has been either the number 1 or the number 2 killer in almost every country around the world. And if you speak to most people, they think CPR will help you recover from cardiac arrest. The movies tell you that. It's not what happens. CPR is fantastic. It'll help buy you more time, but it will not get you back to the normal rhythm. You have to have defibrillation. And so what a lot of these instances have raised is that it opens up the question to what is going on and what can we do about it. And there have been some very public instances in the NFL in America. There was a guy called Damar who collapsed with a cardiac arrest. There have been 2 basketballers in the US have also collapsed, and there are also some school basketball kids who have collapsed during games. And people going, well, hang on, these are young kids, they're super fit athletes, they shouldn't be having heart issues. But the reality is, sudden cardiac arrest can hit anyone of any age. It's more prominent in people over 65. But what these very public incidents has done, it's raised people's awareness. So people are thinking, this is a problem, we need to find a solution, which actually helps everyone because it is already a problem, but now people are more aware of it.
Brilliant. And just so you know, my own personal journey with that is he's now 3 years old, but at age 14 months, my son was diagnosed with Wolff Parkinson White, which is effectively, we've all got an electrical pathway to our heart. He had 3 additional ones and had to have an ablation for that when he was like 17, 18 months old. So he was this little toddler running around through the hospital, in an adult hospital, getting an ablation, and the youngest in New South Wales to get that as a procedure. But it was also interesting to find out in Australia, to give you an idea, there's actually a long wait list just to get in to go and see cardiologists as an area. So like for me, I said, I look at what you guys are doing, and it's like you literally have got a product where, you know, it will ultimately not only just save people's lives, but you're talking about in the thousands, like what you said, for your goal. Now, Tim, just going back to you on the funding side, for in how you think about, you know, the provision of debt and I suppose the expansion of opportunities and so forth, like where do you see the market opportunities lie for you guys over the next sort of 3 years?
Yeah, I think in terms of the market opportunities in Australia, at this point in time, the banks represent about 85% of lending within our area, which is businesses doing anywhere from 5 million to 300 million in revenue, when we're looking to lend anywhere from $2 to $25 million. However, with the capital requirements that the banks are now under, with the need for them to be much more stringent with their credit checks and their inability to think outside of the box, that means that for private credit firms such as ourselves, the opportunity set is going to only get bigger. And a good example is you look at the more developed private credit markets in the US and Europe, where in the US the inverse is true. Private credit represents about 85 or 80% of lending in the sector. So there is a huge opportunity in Australia in the private credit space. Now, whether we will get to the reverse like it was in the US, maybe not, but nevertheless, the banks are going back, private credit firms are coming forward, so it will become a much more unique form or larger form of capital in the Australian market.
And for you, like typically in how people engage with you, do they engage with you directly? Do they go through their accountants? Do they go through their finance brokers? Like how do companies learn to find out about Causeway, apart from typing into Google, I need cash?
That's a good question. If you type I need cash, Causeway comes up first. No, unfortunately, that's not true. Look, we get our loan origination through what we call our originators. So it's a group of people who we've developed relationships with over many years, 20 years we've been in the market, and they're not the companies directly themselves, although that does sometimes happen. We'll have companies directly approach us, but generally it'll be the accountants, the debt advisors, the lawyers, sometimes brokers who will come to us. They'll know our product, and they'll say, Tim, I've got a business down in South Australia that's looking to borrow $4 million. They have a servicing contract for submarines for the Australian Defence Force. They've had some opportunities to grow their business. They've got some bank finance in there at the moment, but the bank won't do $4 million. They'll only do $2 million. Will you look at it? And that's how we get introduced to it. We'll do a desktop review, check out, make sure that we actually think there is an opportunity there. And then we go into our extended due diligence phase, which means we go on site, we meet the management team, we get any external valuations done, and we also ensure that the credit and background checks of the borrower are done thoroughly. So that's how we find our loans, and that's how we structure and write them.
Brilliant. And for you, Andrew, the part that comes to mind with medical device and with health tech and so forth, earlier we talked about the personalisation aspect. The other part which fascinates me, and I think is going to become very important for all of us going forward, is the data which gets collected by these devices and then what that dashboard of data looks like. Can you sort of take us inside into the minds of, you guys from an innovation standpoint and how you see data, how you see its potential for use for good? And I say that because there is lots of things you can learn from it. And, I'd just love to know how you're seeing it.
Sure. So to give people an idea, whenever one of our devices is activated, we record the data that's being collected, and it gets sent back to us via the mobile phone network to us so we can analyse it. As you can imagine, it's very hard to capture real life data of like the pulse rate and the heart rhythms of someone who's having a cardiac arrest. Someone's normally not anywhere near any medical equipment, and if they are, then the people are busy trying to save them rather actually than analysing and collecting it. Part of the regulatory requirements is that you collect that data, but unlike almost every other AED out there, we actually, our devices communicates via the mobile phone network, so we can actually collect that data. And so we're very quickly accumulating the world's largest database of cardiac arrhythmias. What that allows us to do is...
Do you want to explain what arrhythmia... Does everyone know what arrhythmia is?
So arrhythmia is just an uneven heartbeat, so an irregular heartbeat. So we are collecting the heart rhythm, sort of like when you go to a hospital and you see the squiggly line when you get a heart monitor. We're collecting that data for people who are having a sudden cardiac arrest. So it's not a standard rhythm. It's not a healthy rhythm. That rhythm is only happening when someone's having a cardiac arrest, and we are one of the few devices that can actually collect it and then analyse it. We'll actually collect it as a whole. What it opens it up to, though, is that we can actually provide that to scientists. We look at our own and get a better understanding of what is actually happening in those first early minutes of a cardiac arrest. The science, the understanding of what is happening during a cardiac arrest is actually scarily limited because the information isn't available. It's not like someone has a cardiac arrest and then a doctor comes along and puts some monitors on them and they goes, oh, look at that, that's a strange sort of rhythm. So we're able to get the very earliest data, and because we're collecting it from every single one of our devices when it's used, we're building up this database. And what we're hoping and what we think is going to happen is currently there are 9 different main categories of arrhythmias, but only 2 of them are currently shockable. So if, as an AED, you're only allowed to actually give a shock to 2 of the 9. We believe by accumulating this data, we'll actually be able to show that 2 or 3 or 4 or maybe 5 of those are, probably not 5, 3 or 4 of those arrhythmias could actually be shocked. So that significantly increases the number of people that we can potentially save. You can also use it for other sort of research to better understand what is going on with the heart during a sudden cardiac arrest, which is just simply data that no one else has and that is almost impossible to get. So we think that it'll be incredibly useful. We don't even know exactly where it's going to go. We can already see some applications, but we think over time that it could really make a difference in heart health.
And you guys also, correct me if I'm wrong, you guys also have a product where you're sort of looking at it from a continuous monitoring perspective?
Yeah, so because we've already miniaturized and made the defibrillator super light, we can use the same technology and make it even smaller, but have it continuously monitoring on someone. So if someone is at a high risk of a cardiac arrest, they can wear this continuously, and they know if they do have a slight arrhythmia or a large arrest, it's already on them and they can be shocked. Now, the device does work. There is an existing device in the market. It weighs 2.5 kilograms and it costs $4,500 a month to rent from the current provider. Our product weighs 350 grams at the moment. We're going to be able to shrink that down, and you can buy it outright for $600. So we think we're going to be able to open this up to far more people who would otherwise never have a chance of having this technology. And there are people who are walking around who have already had a cardiac arrest or a heart attack, and they're at high risk of having another one.
And even just arrhythmia episodes.
Just arrhythmia episodes. And sometimes they happen at night. And we already discussed that if you have a sudden cardiac arrest, every minute that passes before defibrillation, it reduces your chances of survival by 10%. So by having it on them directly, the chance of survival is much higher. Like we're talking 90%.
What's the lowest age group that can use it and the highest age group?
The device is certified for everyone. So we're designed for infants. We use it for infants up until anyone who has a heartbeat or doesn't quite have a heartbeat.
Good to know. So the issue for my son was when he would go to sleep, his heart would go between 180 to 220 beats per minute whilst asleep. So he'd be sitting there, he'd be completely asleep, sweating, because his heart was just absolutely pumping. And the way they actually stopped it, funny enough, was they had to dunk his head into ice cold water to shock him out of it. And I was like, shit, and it just creates a response in the body that stops it. But anyway, that was a side note. And just to finish off on the last question for you, Tim, you look at you guys, there's a 30-year track record in the business. You guys have been doing this. Like, this is a decade-long opportunity. There is so many opportunities from the business financing side, whether it be acquisitions, whether it be partial sell downs, whether it be, new investors looking to come in and fund companies and so forth. Like, what's the roadmap? What do you see as the vision over this next 5 to 10 years? Just given, I know it's a long way to think forward, but I'm sure you see some early trends as far as how this will ultimately play out for this business credit space. And I'm going to throw in there with the fact of what we talked about beforehand, where companies will have an ability to get to profitability a lot faster than what they did previously. What does that look like for you guys?
No, that's a good question. I think in terms of my crystal ball, I don't know how good it is, but I'll give it a crack. So I think one of the things that we're seeing a theme of, and it was mentioned earlier in the conference, is that businesses are staying private for longer. And businesses which are listed are even going private. The reason being, and a great example, is a small listed company in Australia has so many disclosure requirements. They have all of these things that they need to do to stay on the ASX, and that's a cost. That's a cost that you were talking about. What about the cost that the business actually needs to spend on? That cost means that they can't spend that money elsewhere in actually growing their business. So staying private makes sense for these businesses, and more businesses are going to do that moving forward, especially if there is private capital available to them. 20 years ago when private credit wasn't a thing, then they didn't have that private lending market. They were like, well, we need to be listed because we need to raise equity from the listed market, or we need to raise equity from the listed bond market. We can't access this private source of capital. But now that this private source of capital is growing and becoming a much bigger player in the Australian market and globally, you're just going to see more businesses staying private for longer. So I think that's what you're going to see over the next 5 to 10 years. And you're going to see more private credit players, and you're going to see that opportunity really grow.
Brilliant. Thanks, Tim. And once again, as interest rates, even though it's not in Australia, no plans for it to come down in Australia, you can see how much it would also grow if interest rates sort of start to head back down to that sort of 3%, 2% mark, etc.
Absolutely.
Okay, Andrew, final question for you. You obviously love technology in general. This is going to be a generalized question. Me and him have debates about this, about sort of technology, just the sort of general direction of technology. Let's keep it to healthcare, medical devices. What do you see as the biggest trend over the next 5 years?
I think it'd have to be a combination of AI, as cliche as that sounds, but also personalisation. I think personalisation in healthcare is gaining momentum. A lot in medical device and what we're doing, but also more generally with customised healthcare, genomics, that type of thing.
So what does that ultimately mean for me as the customer?
You're going to get, unless it gets, let's not go there. It means you're going to get more personalised healthcare, hopefully, that is better targeted to you, which means you need less treatment and it'll be more effective.
And will I get faster diagnosis? or earlier predictors or earlier signals?
Ideally, but healthcare is also a big business, so it depends. There's a lot of
Correct.
impediments in place.
And I think that's one of what I didn't mention in my presentation earlier. One of the biggest challenges is that just like businesses have immune systems, and it typically comes from the sort of middle layers of a company, so too does where, big healthcare, big pharma are making their money, the big four medical device manufacturers, et cetera, make their money. Bringing in innovation can sometimes be acquired to stop the, so it'd be interesting to see for me how that actually plays out, because as I said, like someone was telling me earlier today, one of the attendees was mentioning that, coming out of one of the US universities, there is different targeted solutions for dealing with things like stage 4 cancer, et cetera. But one of the biggest challenges is so much money gets made when someone goes on to chemotherapy and, now sort of introducing immunotherapy systems that, having solutions which are one-stop shops to solve something is a competitive threat.
Yeah, absolutely. We're not on that space, but we're seeing it ourselves in that there is so much entrenchment with even the public access AED market that we're being attacked on all fronts. And the fact that they see us as such a threat, despite the fact that we very openly say, we're going after the home market. You guys aren't even in people's homes. You're not trying to market to people's homes. We've got a $600 device. You've got a $2,500 device. Our device weighs less than half a kilogram. Yours weighs almost 3 kilograms. Completely different products, but they are attacking us on every way possible. And they're trying to, in one of the areas we're selling into, they're mobilizing the regulators to go after us. So we're the most tested, proven, thoroughly analysed AED that has ever been on the market, because we've got so many impediments put in front of us that we've had to clear. And every time we're told, you can't do that, that's impossible, you'll never get this device approved, you can't actually do it from a technology perspective, we just keep going, no, we'll clear that hurdle and that hurdle and that hurdle, and we'll eventually get there. But the impediments that people are putting in front of us are incredibly, well, they're exhausting, but it's also frustrating that we are literally trying to save lives. These people are also saying they're trying to save lives, but they're stopping us from helping people and putting devices where they don't even have the devices.
There was a great panel session at one of the All In Summit podcasts where they actually the All In Summit, where they actually talked literally about that topic, where as companies get bigger, then obviously in come the lobbyists and in come the goal then sort of is how to dominate market share by stifling that sort of next layer of innovation. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to finish on that note. We have actually gone over time. We are right now getting in between the way of you and drinks. On that note, I want to say thank you very much, everyone, for coming to Venture and Capital. I hope you enjoyed the event. I hope you enjoyed the content. The biggest thing I hope you get is, number one, you find a company which is relevant for you to participate in from an investment perspective. Number two is I hope it's helped either add or shape or confirm your own investment thesis in how you're thinking about markets going forward, whether it be on the debt side, whether it be on medical device, whether it be on renewable energy, whether it be on the future of what the robotic kitchen looks like, whether it be, whatever the area it may be, or crypto as an example. I hope you've got something out of today. Thank you very much for joining. Enjoy your networking and drinks.